My name is Rosen. I'm 68 years old. The year before I retired, I did something very stupid. I planned the money. I planned the handoff. I planned the tax conversations, the Medicare dates, the insurance paperwork, the budget, the mortgage situation, the savings buckets, all the things a man like me is supposed to plan. And I did not plan what I was going to do with myself at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning when nobody was waiting for me. That sounds dramatic. It wasn't. It was quiet. That was the problem. I had spent more than 30 years building a business that could run without me. I was proud of that. I had good people in place. I had the right lawyers. I had the right accounts. I had the right signatures on the right documents. Look, I didn't fall into retirement. I walked into it with a folder in my hand. And still, about 3 months after I stepped back, I was standing in my kitchen in South Florida, holding a cup of coffee I didn't really want, staring at my phone like it might assign me a purpose. It didn't. Barbara was sitting at the table reading something on her iPad. She looked up and said very gently, which is usually when I should get nervous, "You know, Alan, you prepared the business for your retirement. I don't think you prepared yourself." I wanted to argue. I had no argument because she was right. And the worst part was I had a full year to see it coming. The mistake was not that I retired. The mistake was thinking retirement started on the day I stopped working. It doesn't. It starts the year before, maybe earlier. But that last year matters in a way I didn't understand. You wake up and the calendar still looks full. Calls, meetings, paperwork, a few trips, lunch with the attorney, coffee with the accountant, a conversation with your adult children about what changes and what doesn't. And that feels normal, not good weird, just normal. Then the strange part begins quietly. People start asking you how excited you are. You say you are. You believe you are, mostly. You picture warmer mornings, fewer calls, no airport rushing, no office emergencies, no one needing an answer before lunch. And then, under all that, there is another question. Who am I when nobody needs my answer? I didn't say that out loud. Men like me are very good at turning fear into logistics. We don't call it fear. We call it planning. We move money around. We clean up documents. We schedule doctors. We check on Medicare. We call it being responsible. And some of that is responsible. But I used all of it to avoid the thing I didn't want to look at. I'm not going to give you a 5-step system. I'm not going to pretend I solved this neatly. I don't give advice. I tell you what happened. And what happened was this. The year before I retired, I handled almost everything except the part of retirement I would actually have to live inside. We're in a conference room in Fort Lauderdale. This is maybe 14 months before I officially step back. Dark table, too much glass, air conditioning set low enough to preserve meat. I remember that because Barbara had a sweater over her shoulders and she kept rubbing her arms. Across from me was Martin, the attorney who had been with us for years. Good man, dry as toast. Next to him was a younger associate who kept using words like transition and governance, which made me want to take a walk. We were reviewing the structure, not the exciting part, the boring part, which usually means the important part. Who signs what? Who approves what? Who gets access to which accounts? What happens if I'm traveling? What happens if I'm sick? What happens if I get hit by a bus? Lawyers love buses. They put me under one at least 6 times that afternoon. At one point, Martin slid a packet across the table and said, "Alan, this is good. This can run without you." That sentence should have made me happy. That was the goal. I had spent years building toward that sentence. Instead, I looked at the packet and felt something drop in my stomach. Not panic, something smaller, like somebody had quietly taken my chair out of the room. Barbara saw it. Of course she did. On the drive home, she said, "You didn't like hearing that." I said, "No, I liked it." She said, "No, you liked accomplishing it. You didn't like what it means." That was Barbara. One sentence and suddenly I had homework. I remember we were on Federal Highway, stopped at a red light near a place where we used to get deli sandwiches years earlier. The light turned green and I didn't move. The guy behind me honked. I waved like an idiot and drove. That was the realization. I had built freedom, and part of me was insulted that the business could survive it. That's not flattering, but it's true. So I want to talk through the things I wish I had done in that last year. Not the legal things, not the financial things. Those matter, but I am not your financial advisor. I'm talking about the human things, the things that would have made that first year less strange, the things I could have practiced before the silence got so loud. The first thing I should have done was test my future week before I was forced to live it. Not imagine it, test it. There is a big difference. I had this fantasy that once I retired, my days would naturally fill themselves with good things. Morning walks, long breakfasts with Barbara, reading, seeing the grandchildren, maybe a little travel, maybe some charity work, maybe learning enough about my son's work to stop nodding like a decorative plant every time he explained software. It all sounded very reasonable. Then retirement arrived, and I learned something embarrassing. A free day is not automatically a good day. A free day is just empty until you put something honest inside it. About 6 months before I retired, I took a week off. Not a vacation, I was home. No travel, no office, no checking in unless something burned down. That was the rule. By Wednesday morning, I had checked my phone 47 times before 10 a.m. I know because Barbara counted. She didn't tell me at first. She just sat there watching me pretend to read the paper while my hand kept drifting toward the phone like it had a medical condition. Finally, she said, 47. I said, what? She said, times you've looked at that thing. I said, that's not possible. She said, I started counting after breakfast. Now, I could have been offended. I probably was for about 9 seconds. Then I realized she had caught me doing the exact thing I claimed I was done doing. I was not relaxing. I was waiting to be interrupted. That is a very different state. If I had been smarter, I would have run more of those tests. A week without the office, a week with my mornings open, a week where I had to decide in advance what counted as a good day. Instead, I treated that week like a weird little fluke. It wasn't a fluke, it was a preview. And here's the thing, a preview is only useful if you respect it. I didn't. I said what men say when they don't want to learn from the obvious. I'll be fine. That's usually the sentence right before I am not fine. The second thing I should have done was build a reason to get dressed before I lost the old one. I don't mean a job. I don't mean another business. I mean something with a time, a place, and another person expecting me. That part matters. I underestimated how much of my dignity was tied to being expected somewhere. Not needed in some grand way, just expected. For most of my adult life, I had a reason to put on a shirt with a collar, a call at 9, a lunch at 12:30, a flight to catch, a meeting I didn't want but still had to attend, a problem waiting for me, usually wearing a suit. Then that went away. At first, it felt luxurious. By week 3, I was having breakfast at 10:45 in a t-shirt I should have thrown out in 2009. Barbara walked into the kitchen and looked at me, not mean, just accurate. She said, "Are we doing this now?" I said, "Doing what?" She pointed at the shirt. Now, I want to defend myself here. I was retired. I had earned the right to wear a terrible shirt in my own kitchen. But she wasn't talking about the shirt. She was talking about the drift. Barbara has a way of noticing the drift before I do. That year before retirement, I should have put things on the calendar that had nothing to do with the business and everything to do with being alive. Breakfast with Eli every other Saturday. A standing walk with a friend. One morning a week helping at the community center. A class I would probably be bad at. Something. Anything real. Instead, I thought leisure would be structure. It isn't. Leisure is beautiful when it sits inside structure. Without structure, it starts to leak all over the floor. I don't fully understand why that happens, but it did for me. Maybe because I had been trained by urgency for so long that peace felt suspicious. Maybe because the body gets used to being pointed at a target. Maybe because men are not as complicated as we pretend. Give us somewhere to be and we behave a little better. I learned that late. Too late, maybe not, but later than I should have. The third thing I should have done was talk to Barbara about the marriage we were retiring into, not the marriage we had survived. Those are not the same thing. Barbara and I had been married a long time by then. We had raised kids. We had been broke, real broke. We had money come in and money go out. We had bad years, good years, quiet years, years where I was gone too much, years where she stopped complaining about it because complaining takes energy. I thought that meant we knew each other. We did, but we knew each other inside the old arrangement. I was moving, she was holding the center, I was on planes, she was home more, I was chasing deals, she was keeping track of the dentist appointments, the birthdays, the family weather, the things I used to call small because I was an idiot. Then I retired and suddenly I was home, a lot. Barbara did not get a retired husband. She got a man walking around her house looking for a department to manage. That is not romantic. One afternoon, maybe 2 months after I fully stepped back, I reorganized the pantry. There was no emergency, no crisis. No one had asked. I just opened the pantry, saw what I believed was inefficiency, and decided I was the man for the job. I moved the olive oil. I grouped the teas. I put labels on a few shelves. Labels, like the almonds had been underperforming. Barbara came in, stood there for a moment, and said, "Were you invited to do this?" I said, "I'm helping." She said, "No, you're supervising carbohydrates." That line hurt because it was funny and because it was true. We should have had that conversation the year before. What does it look like when I'm home more? Where do you want me? Where do you not want me? What parts of the house, the day, the rhythm, the friendships, the errands, the quiet have been yours for years? What am I entering, not taking over? I wish I had asked those questions while I still had the business absorbing most of my nervous energy. Instead, I arrived at home with all this leftover command in me and nowhere appropriate to put it. Barbara was patient, not endlessly patient. There's a difference. One night she said, "Alan, I don't need a manager. I need my husband." I remember that one. I didn't answer quickly, for once. The fourth thing I should have done was make peace with being less important in rooms I had built. That one was ugly. I don't enjoy saying it, but if I'm going to tell it, I'll tell it straight. When you spend decades being the person people call, it changes how you hear silence. Silence starts to sound like rejection. It isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's just competence. The people you trained are doing the thing you trained them to do. That should feel good. Some days it does. Other days it feels like they learned the song and stopped needing the singer. The year before I retired, I should have practiced staying out of the room. There were chances, plenty of them. A supplier issue in Atlanta, a personnel mess I would have loved to sink my teeth into, a contract review where I knew exactly which paragraph was going to cause trouble. Every time I told myself I was helping by stepping in. Sometimes I was. Sometimes I was just feeding the old part of me. There was one call, about 8 months before I stepped back, that I still think about. Daniel, my son, happened to call right after it. He was on his lunch break, walking somewhere in California, wind hitting the phone. He said, "How's the transition going?" I said, "Good, they're almost ready." He laughed a little. I said, "What?" He said, "Dad, they might be more ready than you are." Now, I did not appreciate that from a man who once tried to explain cloud infrastructure to me using a pizza analogy. But he was right. They were ready. I wasn't. Because readiness is not just having people in place. Readiness is being able to let them make a decision you would not have made and not rush in like the building is on fire. I failed at that more than once. There was a meeting I was supposed to skip. I dialed in anyway. Just listening, I said. That's a lie men tell before they start talking. 10 minutes in, I interrupted. 20 minutes in, I was running the meeting. Afterward, one of the younger guys, a very capable man named Aaron, called me privately and said, "Alan, if you want us to lead, you have to let us lead when you're uncomfortable." He said it respectfully. I still hated hearing it. That was a $0 lesson that cost me more pride than some very expensive mistakes. The fifth thing I should have done was decide what I wanted my family to experience after I retired. Not what I wanted them to think of me, what I wanted them to experience. That distinction matters. I wanted my children to see me as successful. I won't pretend otherwise. I wanted Daniel and Rachel to know their father had built something. I wanted my grandchildren to feel safe around the life Barbara and I made. None of that is wrong. But retirement exposes the gap between being admired and being available. Those are not the same. Before I retired, I told myself I would see the kids more. That was the whole plan. More dinners, more school events, more time. But more is not a plan. More is what you say when you want credit for an intention. The year before I retired, Rachel invited us to Maya's school performance. It was some spring thing. Little kids dressed like flowers. I don't remember the theme. I remember Maya had a yellow paper crown that kept sliding sideways. I had a call that afternoon. Not an emergency. Important, yes, but not a fire. I told Rachel I might be late. She said, "Dad, it's 25 minutes. I said, "I know, sweetheart." I missed the first half. When I got there, Maya was on stage, looking serious in the way 7-year-olds look serious when they have been given choreography. Afterward, she ran to Barbara first, then to Rachel, then to me. That's normal. I don't want to make it more dramatic than it was, but I felt the order, and I had earned the order. That last year, I should have started acting like the retired grandfather I claimed I wanted to become. Not after the retirement dinner, before. Because people don't automatically believe a new version of you just because you announce one. They believe what you repeat. Eli and Maya knew me as the grandfather who appeared, enjoyed them, bought something too expensive, and left for a call. Not a bad grandfather, but not fully present either. I've been working on that, imperfectly. The other week, Eli asked me to watch him build something with those little plastic bricks. I don't know what the sets are called now. When Daniel was young, they were just bricks, and they hurt like a legal judgment when you stepped on them. Eli talked for 40 minutes about pieces, shapes, some character with a name I immediately forgot. I wanted to check my phone twice. I didn't. That sounds small. It was not small for me. That is the part of retirement I wish I had practiced. Being there without performing importance. Being present without turning it into a lesson. Sitting with a child in a pile of plastic pieces and letting that be enough. The sixth thing I should have done was admit I was grieving something before I started calling it freedom. That is probably the hardest one, because grief sounds too dramatic when nobody died. But something did end. A version of me ended. The man who could fix the problem, the man who knew who to call, the man with 3 phones and 2 flights, and a dinner he was already late for. I don't miss all of him. Barbara does not miss all of him either. But I can't pretend he was nothing. He built the life I'm sitting in. He paid for the house. He survived the years when there was no guarantee. He got up when I was 31 and broke and embarrassed and afraid, and he kept going. So when I retired, I think part of me felt like I was being ungrateful to put him down. That sounds strange, maybe it is, but that's how it felt. My father used to say, "A man should know what season he's in." I heard that every Friday night growing up in one form or another. My father had a dozen versions of the same lesson. Most fathers do. I did not know what season I was in. I knew what the paperwork said. I knew what the calendar said. I knew what the accounts said. I did not know what my life was asking of me. The year before I retired, I should have sat with that. I should have said to Barbara, I think I'm going to miss being that man, even though I'm tired of being him. That would have been more honest than half the speeches I gave about being excited. I was excited. I was also scared. I was relieved. I was also offended. I was grateful. I was also lost. People like clean emotions. Retirement did not give me clean emotions. It gave me a drawer full of wires. I spent months pretending they weren't tangled. They were. The thing I know now is that the year before retirement is not just a countdown. It's a rehearsal. It's the last safe place to notice what you're going to miss. The last safe place to build something small before the big thing disappears. The last safe place to have the awkward conversation while there is still enough noise around you to keep it from feeling too exposed. I didn't use that year well enough. I used pieces of it well, but not the way I could have. And I'm not saying that with regret exactly. Regret is too sharp. This is more like looking back at a room and seeing the door I walked past. If you're in that year now or near it, I'm curious about something. What is the part you're planning carefully, and what is the part you're avoiding? Not publicly polished. The real answer. Is it the money, the marriage, the empty calendar, the adult children, the fear that nobody will call? Leave a comment and tell me the part you think you're avoiding. I read those more closely than you might think. Barbara reads some of them too, which means I occasionally get corrected in my own kitchen by strangers on the internet. Retirement is humbling in new ways. All right, that's enough from me today. Take care of yourselves.